Krishna Jai Maharaj. So devotees, last night, the last verse we did was 44. And it's basically, it's more or less the end of Arjuna apologizing. Yeah, he really apologized and really presented himself extremely humbly, and also in a confused way, of course. Anyway, we read through that. You're all familiar with this. So yes, so finally in verse 44 last night, he begged Krishna to please forgive him, just as 3 people who are junior to 3 other people, just as those junior people beg the senior people for forgiveness for some sort of shortcoming, discrepancy. As a father tolerates the impudence of the son. Impudence means the cheekiness and being a bit of a rascal, a little rascal. Like a senior friend tolerates the impertinence, a mild rudeness of a junior friend, and as the husband tolerates the familiarity of the wife, please tolerate wrongs I may have done you. Yes, so that was verse 44. So now this evening we'll begin with 45, and there's a subsection here from, it's just verse 45 and 46. And here, Arjuna is begging Krishna to please, well actually, please show me your 4-armed form, human-like. It's human-like. You don't get a lot of regular humans with 4 arms. But other than the extra couple of arms, that form of Krishna is more or less human-like. So he wants to see that. Yeah. So, okay, let's just read these 2 verses and then we'll go through the purports a bit. So again, it's Arjuna speaking. After seeing this universal form, which I've never seen before, I am gladdened, but at the same time, my mind is disturbed with fear. Therefore, please bestow your grace upon me and reveal again your form as the personality of Godhead, O Lord of Lords, O abode of the universe. Yes, so the form as the personality of Godhead basically means, oh my gosh, birds trying to come into the temple. Haribo! Okay, excuse me. So when he says, I want to see you again as the personality of Godhead, he basically is referring to the 4-armed form, because that's Krishna as God, as the Lord, as the Master, yeah, the big controller. even in this material world, as Garbhadakshay Vishnu, Kshirodakshay Vishnu, they have 4 arms. Whereas Krishna in Vrindavan, he is, of course, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but that's his, as we'll see, Manusham Rupam. We'll come across this term shortly in a few verses. Manusham Rupam, this human, really the form of a man. Yeah, not as the personality of Godhead, but as Krishna, his dear friend and cousin. So Arjuna, of course, he's, in a sense, he's happy. Prabhupada mentions here, it's in the first sentence. Arjuna's always in confidence with Krishna because he's a very dear friend, and as a dear friend is gladdened by his friend's opulence, Arjuna is very joyful to see that his friend Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is wonderful, just wonderful. And that Krishna can show such a wonderful universal form. It's, but still, as we have seen, of course, very vividly indeed, and even here Arjuna says, so I'm gladdened, but at the same time my mind is disturbed with fear. Yes, so he wants to see Krishna again as in a human type form, at least, a Narayan form, Vaikuntha form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Srila Prabhupada says, well, Prabhupada makes an interesting point in the middle of the purport. It's just literally in the middle of the purport. And it's important just to really sort of have it clear what is the universal form. Prabhupada says, this universal form is material and temporary, as the material world is temporary. But in the Vaikuntha planets, he has his transcendental form with 4 hands as Narayan. So Arjuna wants to see that form from Vaikuntha, very powerful and, you could say, shelter-giving form. And 46, O universal form, O 1,000-armed Lord, I wish to see you in your 4-armed form, with helmeted head, and with club, wheel, conch, and lotus flower in your hands. I long to see you in that form. Yeah, so, So Prabhupada makes the point in the purport, Krishna has so many forms, but it's the 3rd sentence, but Arjuna knew that Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, assuming his temporary universal form. So it's just, it's not so interesting for the devotees, the universal form. But any one of the personal forms, spiritual, transcendental forms of the Lord, they're very interesting. But material form, the universal form, it's temporary. It's not even a real form. You cannot have a relationship with it. No thanks, not so interesting. And Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that right at the end of the purport, Krishna, he's not different from his plenary expansions, and he is God in any of his innumerable forms. In all of these forms, he's fresh like a young man. That is the constant feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who knows Krishna becomes free at once from all contamination of the material world. So, in other words, this is the fact that Krishna is able to manifest so many forms, unlimited spiritual forms. This shows he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Who else has all these forms? Not even Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma. Not like that. Not like Krishna. So now we go into the final full section from verse 47 to verse 55, which is the last verse of the chapter. And this section is called, we call it, Only the Pure Devotees Can See the Two-Armed Form. So here, well, there are sort of some subsections, but we'll just take it as one. Well, there's a subsection, shall we say, from here, from 47 to 50, what is it, 1? 47 to 51. And we call this, well, it's divided into further subsections. First of all, 47 and 48. Krishna withdraws his universal form. Then, 49 and 50, Krishna shows his four-armed form, and then 50 to 51, finally he shows his two-armed form. Yeah. So the whole section then is from 47 to 51, subsection, with these little, breaks, changes in theme. Let us just read through from 47 to 51. 47. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, happily have I shown you, by my internal potency, the Supreme Universal Form within the material world. No one before you has ever seen this primal form, unlimited and full of glaring effulgence." 48. O best of the Kuru warriors, no one before you has ever seen this universal form of mine. For neither by studying the Vedas, nor by performing sacrifices, nor by charity, nor by pious activities, nor by severe penances can I be seen in this form in the material world. Interesting. Anyway, we'll come back to that. 49. You have been perturbed and bewildered by seeing this horrible feature of mine. Now let it be finished. My devotee, be free again from all disturbances. With a peaceful mind, you can now see the form you desire. Then, so that's Krishna saying that he's going to show the four-armed form. Then verse 50, it's interesting. Krishna goes, in verse 50 actually, In verse 50, Krishna shows the four-armed form and then the two-armed form, just in verse 50 actually. So verse 50, Sanjaya said to Dhritarashtra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, having spoken thus to Arjuna, displayed his real four-armed form, and at last showed his two-armed form, thus encouraging the fearful Arjuna. And 51. When Arjuna thus saw Krishna in his original form, he said, O Janardhan, seeing this human-like form, so very beautiful, I am now composed in mind, and I am restored to my original nature. All right, very good. So let's go through in a bit more detail as usual. 47. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjuna, happily have I shown you by my internal potency this supreme universal form within the material world. No one before you has ever seen this primal form, unlimited and full of glaring effulgence. Yes, so it's his supreme universal form within the material world. Yes, it's within the material world, not outside. It's not in the spiritual world. So Krishna is saying, yes, I'm happy to have shown you this form, happy because you asked. Krishna is very fond of his devotees, and if his devotees want something from him, then, at least generally, if it's Krishna conscious, then he is happy to give it. And Arjuna wanted to see the universal form, not so much for himself, in fact, not actually for himself, but for the benefit of the people in general who don't know about these things. Yes. So, Lord Krishna knows that that was the purpose of Arjuna in requesting to see the universal form, to help the people become Krishna conscious. That's such a wonderful desire. The Lord appreciates so much when devotees have that desire. So therefore, Krishna says, happily have I shown you this form. You know, sorry that you couldn't handle it, but, you know, I'm happy to be able to have fulfilled your desire. Yes. Of course, Krishna does say, that no one before you has ever seen this form. And of course there are instances, even not long before this, speaking of Bhagavad Gita, when people saw some version of the universal form. When Duryodhana wanted Krishna arrested, not long before the battle, Krishna came to Hastinapur to make a last effort to negotiate peace so there wouldn't have to be battle. But Duryodhana wasn't interested and he wanted to have Krishna arrested. So the soldiers came to arrest Krishna. Krishna showed a version of the universal form. And the soldiers were frightened and ran away. But Duryodhana was not frightened. In fact, he said that he thought that Krishna had just got some mystical powers due to pious activities from a previous lifetime. So it would appear that it would appear that it would appear that so Prabhupada actually explains here at the end of the purport. Someone has commented that this form was shown to Duryodhana also when Krishna went to Duryodhana to negotiate for peace. Unfortunately, Duryodhana did not accept the peace offer, but at that time Krishna manifested some of his universal forms. But those forms are different from this one shown to Arjuna. It is clearly said that no one had ever seen this form before. So, it would appear that he didn't see the Kala Rupa, the form of time, because if Arjuna couldn't handle it, Duryodhana would not have been able to handle it. 48. Well, just a sec. There's, oops, what are they? Sorry, pressed the wrong button. Yes. An interesting point. In sort of the middle of the paragraph now, middle of the purport, a little slightly before the middle. No one had seen this universal form of the Lord before Arjuna, but because the form was shown to Arjuna, other devotees in the heavenly planets and in other planets in outer space could also see it. They had not seen it before, but because of Arjuna, they were also able to see it. In other words, all the disciplic devotees of the Lord could see the universal form which was shown to Arjuna by the mercy of Krishna. Disciplic devotees. So it's sort of, there's a parampara, you could say, from Arjuna. This is the point and principle that Prabhupada's making. 48. O best of the Kuru warriors, no one before you has ever seen this universal form of mine. Yeah, he just said that, now he's repeating it. For neither by studying the Vedas, nor by performing sacrifices, nor by charity, nor by pious activities, nor by severe penances can I be seen in this form in the material world. You know, occasionally you get, at least in Hinduism, you get almost everything. But occasionally you get people who say they've seen the universal form. But, yeah, unless they're great devotees, especially blessed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, like Arjuna, or following from Arjuna, they're not going to see it. And Prabhupada makes the point here, I think. Well, in principle, it's at the end of the first paragraph. It is not possible to decry Krishna and at the same time have the divine vision. One cannot have the divine vision without becoming divine. Yes. You can't enter into fire without becoming fire. Yeah. So you can't have divine vision without becoming divine, without becoming a devotee and even a very elevated, special devotee. But, you know, we see in the second paragraph, interesting point, that, we've just heard the description of the universal form, and it's very extraordinary. But in the middle of this paragraph, Prabhupada says, the devotees, however, who are actually in the divine nature and who have divine vision, the pure devotees, are not very much interested in seeing the universal form. As we saw in the previous verse, Arjuna wanted to see the four-armed form, and now he's going to want to see the two-armed form also. These are more attractive, particularly the two-armed form and the universal form. Not attracted. Not attracted. That this is very beautiful and we want a relationship with Krishna in this form. Not like that. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So Arjuna, not only was he not so interested, I mean, he was sort of interested in order, for our sakes, as we just mentioned, to impress us and sort of influence us to take Krishna seriously. But for himself, he'd rather have ultimately the two-armed form. And Prabhupada says here at the end of this second paragraph, as described in the previous verse, Arjuna desired to see the four-handed form of Lord Krishna as Vishnu, and he was actually afraid of the universal form. Okay. Srila Prabhupada, I mean, there are many points here actually, there's a number of points. But Prabhupada makes interesting point in the last paragraph, a couple of 2 or 3 sentences down. Although Bhagavad Gita is considered the preliminary study of the science of God, still it is so perfect that it enables one to distinguish what is what. The followers of a pseudo-incarnation may say that they've also seen the transcendental incarnation of God, the universal form, but that is unacceptable, because it's clearly stated here that unless one becomes a devotee of Krishna, one cannot see the universal form. Yes. So, well, here's an interesting little side point. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says here that now Krishna is going to speak the next verse in a comforting mood to Arjuna, who is still distressed. He's still somewhat distressed because he hasn't seen the four-armed form yet. Only in the next verse will he see the four-armed form in verse 50. I mean, the following verse, verse 50. So Krishna speaks verse 49 to just pacify him. It's like, relax, or as they say, as a lot of people say, young people, chill out. All right. So in a comforting mood, Krishna says, you have been perturbed and bewildered by seeing this horrible feature of mine. Now, let it be finished. My devotee, be free again from all disturbances. With a peaceful mind, you can now see the form you desire. So, okay. Srila Prabhupada gives some sort of interesting background information in the purport. Yeah. Let's just go through it a bit. So in the beginning we know very well Arjuna was so worried about killing Bhishma and Drona, his grandfather and teacher, but Krishna was saying, no, don't do it. And there's a type of reasoning behind it, which Prabhupada goes on to explain, that during the incident in the gambling match of Maharaj Yudhisthira with Shakuni, where Draupadi was lost in the gambling match, then it was, who was it? It wasn't Duryodhana, it was, who was it tried to, Maharaj, undress Draupadi, not Duryodhana, it was Dushasana. Yeah. So he tried to pull off her sari, and Bhishma and Drona were there and witnessed what is, you know, it's just a hideous bit of mistreatment of a very gracious and elevated devotee lady. Just the most shocking, abusive treatment. But they're meant to be the seniors and the wise ones and the upholders of Dharma. They did nothing. So Prabhupada makes the point here in this purport just here, that they were silent, and for such negligence of duty they should be killed. Prabhupada's giving some background information here. So Prabhupada goes on, now Krishna's shown the universal form, and as we read, he shows these people being killed, as if they're already killed. Arjuna saw them being killed, being eaten. And so Prabhupada says Krishna showed the universal form just to show him that these people were already killed for these terrible things they did. So that scene was shown to Arjuna because devotees are always peaceful and cannot perform such horrible actions. So this is one sort of aspect of the Lord's wanting to show the universal form. Not Arjuna wanting to see, but Krishna wanting to show the universal form. He also wanted to show it. It wasn't just that Arjuna wanted to see it. So Krishna wanted to show Arjuna that, look, don't worry about this. So that purpose has been taken care of. And again, Prabhupada says, a devotee is not much interested in the universal form, for it doesn't enable one to reciprocate loving feelings. Either a devotee wants to offer his respectful, worshipful feelings, or he wants to see the two-handed form of Krishna so that he can reciprocate in loving service with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Which means Either a devotee wants to offer his respectful, worshipful feelings, means to a four-armed form of the Lord. Very serious, very formal, not informal like a liberal, happy mood, jolly mood of exchange, but very respectful, worshipful feelings. Or he wants to see the two-hand form so he can exchange love with the Lord. Yes, so Baladev Vijayabhushan makes an interesting point in his purport to this verse. He says that Krishna says, I have shown you the destruction of all these people within my form to make you understand that all of them, even Bhishma and others, who stood silent on seeing the defiling of Draupadi, will be killed by me out of anger at that act. Wow. Just see, you insult a devotee. Wow. You get destroyed. And he continues. So they'll be killed. I want you to see, to make you understand that they'll be killed by me out of anger at that act. It is not your burden to kill them, so you should not be disturbed. That's powerful. So on to verse 15. Sanjaya said to Dhritarashtra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, having spoken thus to Arjuna, displayed his real four-armed form, and at last showed his two-armed form, thus encouraging the fearful Arjuna. So from this description, it seems it was kind of quick, that just, into the four-armed form and then into the two-armed form. It wasn't, a drawn-out thing at all. And we see in the purport, Srila Prabhupada compares, at the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada compares Krishna appearing in the prison house of Vasudeva and Devaki, first of all in a four-armed form, and then into a two-armed form. He's comparing that transformation of the Lord with this transformation of the Lord in front of Arjuna. And we can note in, is it here? Wait a minute, no it's not. Okay, but we can note in, let's see, what is it now? Soumya Rupa and the Soumya Vapu, in the last line of the Sanskrit, the beautiful form. That form of Krishna, two-armed form, Krishna in Vrindavan, that's the beautiful form. Four-armed form is very nice, very impressive particularly, but beauty, that's the two-armed form. Soumya Rupa, Soumya Vapu. So Arjuna felt encouraged, but particularly he felt encouraged when he saw the two-armed form. Yes, and we can note that the universal form, one perspective, one way of looking at it, to understand that it's not as high as the two-armed form of Krishna. One reason is that the universal form does not inspire, elicit feelings of devotion for the Lord, as the two-armed form does, but more, it inspires the devotee, if you can use the term inspire, but it makes the devotee feel repulsion and horror and shock and, take it away, I don't want to see it. I can't see it any longer. That's not very nice, is it? But in Krishna, then you see that beauty which is just overwhelming. So Prabhupada goes on to say that when Krishna was present, everyone was attracted to him. Even he was attracted to himself. And Prabhupada quotes Brahma Samhita, verse 38, Premanjana churita bhakti velochanena santa sadaiva hridayeshu velokayanti. He just quotes the very first of these two lines I recited, that Prem Anjana, Anjan or Anjana in Sanskrit, means ointment. Prema Anjana. If you apply the ointment of prema, of love, to your eyes, then Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Velokayanti, then you can see Krishna within your heart. And one devotee, interesting little point, when Srila Prabhupada was staying I think it must have been his only visit to Edinburgh, to Scotland. So Srila Prabhupada, when he was meeting with some devotees in his room after a program, and one devotee asked Prabhupada, is it really true that the pure devotee can see Krishna within his heart? And Prabhupada said, oh yes. And then Prabhupada looked around the room like up, and he pointed as he was looking, and he said, yes, the pure devotee can see Krishna everywhere. And the devotees said that when they heard Prabhupada say that and saw how he gestured, they got this distinct impression that Prabhupada was seeing Krishna. Yeah. We have to smear the ointment of love on our eyes. Then we can see the beautiful form of Krishna. Okay, and then verse 51. When Arjuna thus saw Krishna in his original form, he said, O Janardhan, seeing this human-like form so very beautiful, I'm now composed in mind, and I'm restored to my original nature. And we can note, actually Prabhupada notes, in the first sentence in the purport, that here the words Manusham Rupam, Manusham meaning human being, clearly indicate the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be originally two-handed. Yes. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says Arjuna is now bathing in an ocean of bliss. So anyway, if Krishna was just a regular human, how could he show the universal form? Prabhupada makes this point here in the purport. If Krishna is just a human like you and me, how can he show a universal form? And not just that, how can he show a four-armed form? How can he do these things? He can't do that. It's out of the question. So Prabhupada's emphasizing, we have to be careful not to be misled by the bogus interpreters. commentators. Prabhupada says, the last sentence in the purport, the original verses of Bhagavad Gita are as clear as the sun. They do not require lamplight from foolish commentators. So the last section from 52 to 55, how the subject is how Krishna's two-armed form can only be seen by pure devotion. Pure devotees, pure devotion. Let's read the verses. 52. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, this form of mine you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form, which is so dear." And 53, this may remind you of 48, which we just read a few minutes ago. The form which you're seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. 54. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you, and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. Well, it's pretty clear. And 55, the last verse. My dear Arjuna, he who engages in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities and mental speculation, he who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living being, he certainly comes to me. Okay, that's pretty powerful, isn't it? That's just amazing. So let's go through these verses a bit. 52, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, this form of mine you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form which is so dear." Yeah, okay. So, yes. All right. So Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that in verse 48, which we just read, Lord Krishna said that the universal form can't be seen by pious activities and so on, and austerities and all that. But now here, in this verse, in regard to the two-armed form, now Krishna has used the word sudurdarsham. Darshan means to see. Durdarsham means difficult to see. Sudurdarsham means very difficult to see. Even more difficult than the universal form. That's the point there. The two-armed form is even more difficult to see, more confidential than the universal form. And even Prabhupada makes the point that it's still in the first paragraph, just a couple of sentences down. One may be able to see the universal form of Krishna by adding a little tinge of devotional service to various activities like penances, Vedic study, and philosophical speculation. It may be possible, but without a tinge of bhakti, one cannot see it. Yeah. But still, the two-armed form is more difficult to see. And therefore, well, Krishna says, even the demigod, in the verse, even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form. And Prabhupada talks about when Krishna appeared in the prison house of Kamsa, and all the demigods were there offering prayers, because to see the two-armed form, that's very special. That's very, very special. So Prabhupada concludes the purport. The conclusion is that although to see the universal form of Krishna is very, very difficult and not possible for anyone and everyone, it is still more difficult to understand his personal form as Shamsundar. And now verse 53. It's kind of, the Sanskrit is somewhat different, but the message, what is actually being said, is effectively the same as 48. The form you're seeing now, the two-armed form, with your transcendental eyes, cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. So it's the same point as 48, but regarding the two-armed form. And we have a special question here for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri in relation to this verse 53. But it's specifically referring to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 6, verse 151, purport. Madhya Lila 6, 151, in which Srila Prabhupada says, it is not possible to understand Krishna simply by studying the Vedas perfectly. One must have the mercy of a devotee, yatpadam. Unless one is favored by a devotee, he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the question is going to be that it's not possible, there's a verse here which we just read, there's a verse here that is saying, a purport at least, that it's not possible to understand Krishna simply by understanding the Vedas perfectly. So how can one understand Krishna? This is the question. One must have the mercy of a devotee, is the answer. And 54, my dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you, and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. So what do we note here? What do we note here? I mean, we note a few things actually, but one thing we note is that Krishna says in the Sanskrit, in the verse, Bhaktya tva ananyaya shakya. Only by ananya bhakti, undivided devotional service, and that's how Prabhupada translates it, ananya bhakti, nothing else, only devotion and service in devotion. Yeah. So then of course, if you are a devotee, then if you study Prabhupada's books, if you do austerities like fasting on Janmashtami, observing Ekadasi, today's Ekadasi, if you give charity to the Lord, to the devotees of the Lord, to the spiritual master, like this. So if you do these things by worship on the altar, offering arti and so on, then if you do these same things in Krishna consciousness, then of course they'll help you to understand Krishna and become Krishna conscious. But what's being referred to was just, demigod worship or just some karma kandya activities and so on. So therefore Prabhupada quotes, or refers to at least, he quotes, Shwet Ashvatar Upanishad, famous verse. One who has unflinching devotion for the Supreme Lord and is directed by the spiritual master in whom he has similar unflinching faith can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead by revelation. Yes. So like this is Krishna consciousness. Aha. And verse 55, my dear Arjuna, he who engages in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities and mental speculation, he who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living being, he certainly comes to me. So basically, Prabhupada's making the point. Basically, Prabhupada is making the point that, Krishna's making the point. And Prabhupada quotes, Anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjata nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vaya ragyam uchate. And a famous verse from Nectar of Devotion, Shri Shri Radharanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. The theme of the Paribhas Sutra of Nectar of Devotion, Anyabilashita Shunyam Jnana Karma Janavritam Anukulyena Krishnanu Shilanam Bhaktir Uttama, that we must execute devotional service like that. Pure devotional service, unalloyed devotional service. This is what Krishna is talking about. All right, so in the last paragraph, let me just read what Prabhupada says to conclude. In summary, the universal form of Krishna, which is a temporary manifestation, and the form of time, which devours everything, and even the form of Vishnu, four-handed, have all been exhibited by Krishna. Thus Krishna is the origin of all these manifestations. It is not that Krishna is a manifestation of the original Vishvarupa, of the universal form, or of Vishnu. Krishna is the origin of all forms. There are hundreds and thousands of Vishnus, but for a devotee, no form of Krishna is important but the original form, two-handed Shamsundar. In the Brahma Samhita it is stated that those who are attached to the Shamsundar form of Krishna in love and devotion can see him always within the heart and cannot see anything else. One should understand, therefore, that the purport of this 11th chapter is that the form of Krishna is essential and supreme. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 11th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of the universal form. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.